everyone. My name is Elise, and today I am presenting my research on gender-affirming hormone bans in prisons, how they put incarcerated transgender populations at risk of heat-related illness and death. My thesis connects concepts that people may not have even realized were related. However, the individual topics themselves have garnered attention in the media. For example, there's been an increasing number of lawsuits against state correctional departments alleging that the exposure of their inhabitants to extreme heat is an Eighth Amendment violation. Federal courts have agreed with the plaintiffs, saying that heat exposure constitutes a form of cruel and unusual punishment. Another headline you may have seen in the news is Trump banning transgender women from federal women's prisons. A part of this executive order also bans certain medical treatments for incarcerated transgender folks, including hormone therapy. This made me wonder how heat affects incarcerated transgender people differently, as well as if the hormone bans have any effect on their heat sensitivity. As far as I am aware, this is the first research project to investigate how incarcerated transgender individuals experience heat. In order to contextualize and thoroughly understand this novel topic, I broke the three main concepts down so that I could evaluate their relationships with each other. For us to understand the interplay between heat and incarceration, we must first understand heat itself. It is well known that heat can be dangerous, as 500,000 people die from heat stress or a stroke every year. We also know that heat is getting worse with climate change. But what is lesser known is that heat exacerbates underlying conditions such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and asthma. During heat waves, these conditions can be worsened and cause illness or death. Not everyone realizes that heat puts them at a greater risk of complication, making it a silent killer. Now, it is important to know that heat impacts incarcerated people differently than non-incarcerated people. Let's say that you live in a home in LA with no air conditioning. During a heat wave, you can leave your hot home and go to a cooling center or another public place with AC. Incarcerated people do not have the ability to leave their small, sweltering cells during such heat events. They're stripped of their freedom and trapped in a small oven with little to no relief from the heat. You may think that this is just an unfortunate byproduct of the carceral system, but carceral heat ecology scholars argue that the system is functioning just as it was meant to. Many prisons were built with heat-conductive materials with the purpose of further punishing their inhabitants. The main thing that can set the transgender experience of heat apart from cisgender folks is hormone therapy. No matter your gender, being on hormone therapy increases heat sensitivity. But the most sensitive time for anyone on hormone therapy is actually when you quit it. Decreases in estrogen or testosterone levels in people of any gender are associated with hot flashes and night sweats. These symptoms are worsened in the presence of heat, which increases the risk of heat-related illness and death. Transgender people are discriminated against in all aspects of the criminal legal system. Police officers are more likely to take action against transgender than cisgender folks during traffic stops. This is contributed to by the fact that the police profile trans folks based on stereotypes of them being sex workers, in the same way that they profile Black and brown people based on other harmful stereotypes. After they are profiled and arrested, transgender people experience administrative violence in the courts. Judges and lawyers can deliberately ignore their gender identities and use dead names and pronouns. Once incarcerated, the weaponized violence begins. Transgender people are over 10 times more likely to experience assault in prisons than cisgender people. If they're threatened, their only option to avoid assault is to voluntarily enter solitary confinement. Essentially, their only escape from violence is to choose to punish themselves. The interplay of these three stages is called the transgender criminal legal nexus. The police disproportionately arrest transgender people so that legal charges may be brought upon them in a court that has its cards stacked against them. Ultimately, the system is built to send these transgender people to prisons where they experience weaponized violence. The US carceral system functions as a way to be tough on crime and ensure public safety. It would like you to think that any harm the people it incarcerates endure is an unfortunate but necessary byproduct needed to keep our streets safe. It wants you to think that this harm isn't undeserved since people need to answer for their crimes. This perspective perpetuates the structural violence that the system enacts on the vulnerable and marginalized groups that end up incarcerated because of their circumstances, not because of an inherent tendency toward criminality. The system functions to punish people who aren't a part of the so-called majority, especially those who refuse to conform. The transgender criminal legal system nexus functions to arrest and put non-conforming people in prison. Then, when they are deprived of access to hormones, they're being punished for going against the grain, as well as being forced to conform. They are housed in small, heat-conductive cells to compound the heat sensitivity and/or illness they're suffering from because of their hormone therapy loss. This is an intentional form of weaponized violence to warn them to not attempt to break the mold again. I argue that the lack of access to GHT is actually not the main problem. It is the product of structural problems that necessitate punishment for any deviance from the norm. You cannot fix the systemic inequality and violence in the carceral system without addressing its root cause, and you cannot fix the root cause when the roots of the system itself are corrupt. This theoretical framework I constructed calls upon abolition, not reform, to correct the systemic inequalities in the US carceral system. Based on my theoretical framework, I created 5 deliverables. I am currently working on 2 of them, and I will elaborate on the other 3 after I present my current progress on the first 2. My first deliverable is a table compiling all state and federal prison GAHT policies. I submitted Freedom of Information Act requests for any that couldn't be found online, and I'm still waiting on a few of those due to administrative delays. Because it is important to account for whether state departments of corrections are complying with their policies, I also documented any past or current lawsuits and complaints. My second deliverable is a map of state and federal prison GAHT policies overlaid on top of prison temperature data from the Oregon State University, mapping the average numbers of days in a year above 90 degrees in each census tract. Based on my table in deliverable 1, I made a chart of how many state and federal prisons fell under each category of GAHT protection. The categories ranged from high, where the states of California and Vermont enshrine access to GHT in prisons into state law, to critical, where the only thing preventing state prisons from banning GHT is an injunction that can be overturned upon appeal. Only 11% of state and federal prisons are located in states with medium or high levels of GHT policy protection. The majority of prisons are in states that either do not allow GHT, do not have policies protecting it, or have tried to ban it but have a judge's injunction upholding access to it. This map has 2 variables. The background layer with a red to white color scale is the average annual days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit in each census tract. 90 degrees is the threshold for extreme caution when heat stroke becomes significantly more likely. I am still working on this map as I wait on the delayed FOIA requests, but you can interact with each of the individual prisons on the map so far by finding it on ArcGIS online using the ID at the bottom of the map. For my other 3 deliverables, my next step is to perform statistical analysis on the map to see whether prisons in hotter census tracts have less GHT protections. This would show whether prisons in hotter areas are weaponizing heat more against their trans inhabitants. I also plan to create a self-help tool for incarcerated trans folks and/or their families to use to advocate for their access to hormones. I plan to publish my tables and maps alongside this tool. Finally, I plan to turn my map into an interactive ArcGIS story map so people can find their own carceral facility on it and see their heat risk and GHT protection level. In my conclusion, I would like to reference back to the abolitionist ideologies I discussed in my theoretical framework. Your main takeaway from this presentation should not be that we need to reform the prison system to guarantee access to GHT. The point is that while GHT bans are an unjust weaponization of heat used to break the morale of incarcerated trans folks, they are one of the many avenues in which the carceral system punishes nonconformists. The only way to ensure access to GHT without the institution finding a different way to marginalize trans folks is to abolish the institution altogether. This is the only way to break the cycle of structural violence. I would like to thank my faculty mentor, Professor Van Kat, for supporting me in my research. Thank you for your time and attention.